Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Archives. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. When I was barely a few months old, my brother would have been around 3 years old. I obviously don't remember it myself, but this story was told so many times growing up that it feels like a memory anyway, like something I somehow absorbed secondhand and carried with me. My mom was home alone with the two of us that night. It was late, the kind of deep night where everything feels heavier and quieter, when even familiar rooms can feel unfamiliar. She was asleep, or at least drifting in and out of sleep, when she suddenly felt that something was wrong. Not a sound at first, not movement, just that instinctive feeling in your chest that pulls you out of rest. Parents talk about it a lot, that sense that something isn't right even before there's a clear reason. She lay there for a moment in the dark, listening, trying to figure out what had woken her. Then she heard a whisper. "It's dark." It came from close by, not loud, not playful, just a drawn-out, soft voice cutting through the silence. The room was pitch black. No nightlight, no glow from outside, nothing to give shape to the space. My mum's heart jumped straight into her throat. In that instant, before logic had time to catch up, her mind went to the worst places. Someone was in the house. Someone was standing near her bed in the dark. She froze. Then she realized the voice sounded small. She strained her eyes, trying to see anything at all. And that's when she made out a shape. A tiny figure standing there, barely visible against the blackness. It took her a few seconds longer than she's comfortable admitting to fully understand what she was seeing. It was my brother. He had gotten out of bed, wandered into her room, and was standing there in complete darkness, calmly commenting on it. To him, it was probably nothing more than an observation. To her, it was pure terror until her brain caught up. She later said it took her a full minute to stop shaking, even after she realized it was just her toddler standing there. Looking back, it's almost funny. One of those stories parents laugh about later, after the fear has faded, but there's something about it that still unsettles me. The idea of a small child standing silently in the dark, whispering something so simple at exactly the wrong moment. It's harmless, but it shows how thin the line is between normal and terrifying when you're half asleep and vulnerable. That one isn't the truly scary one, though. That's just the warm-up. The second set of experiences is harder to explain and harder to dismiss. This happened years later when I was older. I was over at my ex's place. At the time, we were still together. We had a few friends over as well, and it was late. Everyone had settled in for the night, sprawled out together, half asleep, snuggling, talking quietly, eventually drifting off. It was one of those nights that should have felt safe. Familiar people. Familiar space. Nothing threatening about it at all. I was awake. I'm usually awake at night. My mind doesn't shut off easily, and I've always been more alert when everyone else is sleeping. I was lying there, staring into the darkness, listening to the normal sounds of a house at night. The quiet hum of distance, the faint creaks as the building cooled, someone breathing beside me. Then I started hearing things. At first, it was so faint I almost ignored it. Footsteps, maybe. Soft, distant, hard to place. Not clearly inside the room, not clearly outside either. Just the suggestion of movement. I didn't react right away because this wasn't new to me. I constantly see, hear, feel, and even smell things that aren't actually there. It's something I've lived with long enough that my default reaction is to dismiss it. So I told myself it was nothing. The sounds shifted. Sometimes it felt like footsteps. Other times something closer to distant shrieks, stretched thin like echoes carried on air that wasn't really there. Not loud enough to wake anyone else, not clear enough to pin down, just enough to be noticed. I stayed still. I didn't wake anyone. I didn't mention it. I assumed it was my brain doing what it often does, filling the quiet with things that don't exist. Eventually, the night passed. Morning came. The sounds faded into the background of memory. The next time I saw my ex, it wasn't at his house. It was at school. We were talking casually about nothing important, when he suddenly mentioned something that made my stomach drop. He told me that he hears screams at night sometimes, that he'll be lying in bed and hear screaming, distant and unsettling with no obvious source. He said it like it was something he'd been dealing with for a while, not like a joke, not like he was trying to scare me. I hadn't told him about what I heard that night. The similarity hit me immediately. Same type of sound, same timing, same context. Late at night, when everything else is quiet, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to chalk it up to coincidence. Another part of me felt that familiar chill, the one that comes when something lines up a little too well. Still, I didn't push it. I didn't want to feed into anything. I didn't want to make it bigger than it was. Not long after that, something similar happened again. I was staying over at another friend's house. Different place, different person, different situation entirely. Once again, it was late. Once again, everyone else was asleep. And once again, I was awake. It was almost routine at that point. I lay there listening to the quiet, letting my thoughts drift. Then I heard it. The same kind of sounds. Faint, distant, hard to describe. Sometimes it felt like footsteps moving through a space that didn't quite exist. Other times it sounded like screaming, but muffled, stretched out, like it was coming from very far away or from behind something thick. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden. It just existed, lingering at the edge of perception. And again, I told myself it was nothing. I've learned not to trust my senses completely, especially at night. I didn't react. I didn't wake anyone. I didn't panic. I just waited for it to pass, and eventually, it did. The next day, my friend mentioned it, casually, almost offhand. She told me that she hears strange things at night sometimes. Screams. No clear source. Just sounds that don't make sense, that make her uncomfortable, but never quite scared enough to do anything about. She didn't know what it was. She didn't say it dramatically, she just stated it as a fact. Again, I hadn't told her what I heard. That was the part that stuck with me. Individually, none of these experiences are particularly terrifying. There's no shadowy figure, no clear threat, no moment of immediate danger. Each one on its own is easy to dismiss. Kids say creepy things. People hear noises at night. Brains are unreliable, especially when tired, but when you put them together, they start to feel heavier. Different places, different people, similar sounds, always at night, always when things are quiet, always when I'm awake and paying attention, and always followed by someone else independently confirming that they experience something similar without being prompted. I don't know what to make of it. Part of me still leans toward rational explanations. Shared environments, old houses, sounds carrying strangely at night. The power of suggestion, even when you don't think you've suggested anything. And of course, my own tendency to experience things that aren't real. But there's another part of me that can't fully let it go. It's not that I think something supernatural is stalking me or following me from place to place. It's more subtle than that. It's the idea that there are things happening at the edges of perception that multiple people can sense without understanding. Things that don't announce themselves clearly enough to be confirmed or denied. What makes it unsettling isn't the fear, it's the uncertainty. Nothing bad happened. No one got hurt. No doors opened. No figures appeared. Life went on normally afterward every time. And yet, those moments linger in my memory more than events that were objectively more frightening. Maybe it's because they don't have an ending, no explanation, no resolution. just a shared experience that slips away once daylight comes, leaving behind the uneasy feeling that something was there, something heard by more than one person, and then gone. Even now, when I think about it, I don't feel panic, I don't feel dread, I just feel watched by the memory itself. Like those sounds are still somewhere out there, waiting for the quiet, waiting for someone awake enough to notice them. It's not really creepy in the way people usually mean when they say that word. There's no jump scare, no obvious horror. It's quieter than that, and somehow that makes it harder to forget. I had just split with my ex around that time, and my life felt off balance in a quiet, exhausting way. Nothing dramatic on the surface, just that hollow feeling you get when something familiar is suddenly gone. I threw myself into work to avoid thinking too much. Long shifts, extra hours, coming home late, going back out early. I was constantly tired, but it felt better than sitting alone with my thoughts. She asked me for a favor not long after we broke up. She was going away for a week to visit relatives and needed someone to house sit. Even though we had split, things weren't hostile between us. There was still a sense of trust there, or at least I thought there was. I agreed without really thinking about it. It gave me somewhere to be, something to do, and honestly, it felt easier than staying in my own place alone. The house itself wasn't strange. I'd been there plenty of times before when we were together. I knew the layout, the sounds it made, the way the stairs creaked in certain spots. It was familiar enough that I didn't feel uneasy being there by myself. If anything, it felt quieter than usual, emptier, but not threatening. That night, I came home absolutely exhausted, the kind of tired that sinks into your bones. My body felt heavy, my head foggy. I remember barely going through the motions, locking the door, maybe checking that everything was off, dropping my stuff wherever it landed. I didn't even bother changing properly. I just wanted sleep, deep, dreamless sleep. I went to bed and passed out almost instantly. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I started to come back to awareness. At first, it wasn't fear that woke me. It was confusion. That half-dream state where your brain is still trying to decide whether what it's hearing belongs to sleep or reality. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming up the stairs. Creak, creak, creak. The stairs in that house were old, and I knew exactly how they sounded. In my half-asleep state, my brain immediately tried to explain it away. I thought it was my girls coming home. That familiar assumption your mind makes to protect itself. You don't jump straight to danger. You look for the safest explanation first. I remember lying there for a second, eyes still closed, thinking they must have come back early. Maybe plans changed. Maybe I slept through a message. But something felt off. The footsteps didn't sound casual. They weren't rushed, but they weren't relaxed either. Each step felt deliberate, like whoever was walking knew exactly where they were going. That feeling cut through the fog in my head faster than caffeine ever could. I opened my eyes, and there he was. A man was standing in the bedroom doorway. He was about 7 feet away from me, close enough that I could see him clearly even in the low light. He had his phone out, the flashlight switched on, and he was slowly moving the light around the room. Over the bed, over the furniture, over me. I can still see it if I think about it too long. The way the light moved, the way his posture was relaxed, like he didn't expect anyone to be there, like the house was supposed to be empty. Every part of my body went cold at once. There was no time for fear to build gradually. It hit all at once, full force. My heart slammed against my chest. My mouth went dry. My hands tingled. That split second where your brain catches up to reality and realizes you are in immediate danger. This was not someone I knew. This was not someone who was supposed to be there. And he was in the room with me while I slept. Before I even fully processed what I was doing, I shouted, "Who the fuck are you?" The words came out loud, raw, full of shock and rage and panic all tangled together. There was no thought behind it, just instinct. The guy froze. That moment, that exact pause, is burned into my memory. The second where both of us realized the situation had completely changed. He hadn't expected me to be there. I hadn't expected him to exist at all. I didn't wait for him to answer. My body moved on its own. I lunged toward the nearest thing I could grab as a weapon. I didn't have time to think about what it was or whether it was effective. I just knew I needed something in my hands. It was a replica katana, something decorative, something that had never been meant for real violence, but in that moment it was everything. It was solid, it was long, it was something. I grabbed it and went after him. He bolted. The guy turned and ran, crashing back down the stairs, panic suddenly replacing whatever confidence he had walked in with. I chased him without thinking. No hesitation, no second guessing, just pure adrenaline and anger driving me forward. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might tear itself apart. My vision narrowed. Everything else faded away except the sound of his footsteps, the slap of feet on wood, the chaos of movement in a space that had been quiet seconds before. He got out. I don't remember the exact details of how he escaped. The front door, the night air, the sudden silence once he was gone. It all blurred together. What I do remember is standing there afterward, weapons still in my hands, breathing hard, realizing how close something terrible had come to happening. The house felt different immediately. Every shadow looked deeper. Every sound felt amplified. The safety I'd felt before was gone completely, replaced with the sickening understanding that someone had been inside, watching, while I was asleep and defenseless. I checked every room, every corner, every door and window. I locked everything twice, then checked again. My hands were shaking the entire time. Once the adrenaline started to wear off, the fear came rushing in to fill the space it left behind. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there instead, listening to the house, replaying the moment over and over in my head. The light from his phone, the distance between us, the way my brain had tried to explain the footsteps away, the realization that if I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't shouted, if I hadn't reacted, things could have gone very differently. That single thought stayed with me. It fucked my sleep up for years after that. Even after I left that house, even after time passed, my body never really forgot. I became hyper-aware of every sound at night. Footsteps in movies made my heart race. Creaking floors made my stomach drop. I'd wake up suddenly, convinced someone was standing in the doorway again, only to find darkness and silence. I slept lightly, if at all. Any noise pulled me straight out of sleep. My brain stopped trusting rest. Night became something to endure rather than relax into. I started checking locks obsessively, before bed, after bed, sometimes in the middle of the night. I'd picture the scenario playing out differently. What if he'd been armed? What if he hadn't run? What if I'd frozen instead of reacting? Those questions don't have answers, but they don't stop asking themselves once they take hold. People underestimate how deeply something like that can settle into you. It wasn't just fear in the moment. It was the way it rewired my sense of safety. Home stopped feeling like a guaranteed safe space. Sleep stopped being a refuge. Vulnerability became something my body resisted even when my mind wanted rest. Years later, I can still feel it sometimes. That spike of alertness when I hear something out of place. That instinct to wake instantly. Heart racing, scanning the room. Even when logic tells me I'm safe, my body remembers that night better than my mind ever could. The scariest part isn't even the intruder himself anymore. It's the realization of how thin the line is between normal life and absolute chaos. One quiet night, one unlocked assumption, one stranger in the dark, and how long it can take to feel truly at rest again. after that line has been crossed. This happened a couple of years ago, and even now I don't really know how to file it in my head. It's not a clean, contained story with an explanation at the end. It's one of those experiences that just sits there, unfinished, and every time I think about it, I get that same uncomfortable feeling in my chest. I went on a church retreat to Alaska with a small group, about 10 of us total. It was meant to be one of those trips where you disconnect from normal life, spend time in nature, reflect, pray, and bond with people. Alaska was already intense enough on its own. The landscape felt huge and quiet in a way I wasn't used to. At night especially, the darkness felt deeper, heavier, like it wasn't just the absence of light, but something with weight to it. One of the guys on the trip talked openly about having sleep paralysis. He'd had it for years, and it happened to him pretty often. He described it in detail, how he would wake up unable to move, unable to speak, feeling like something was watching him from the darkness of his room. He said the feeling of being watched was always the worst part. Not seeing anything clearly, but knowing something was there. He talked about it calmly, like someone who had learned to live with something terrifying by normalizing it. At the time, none of us thought much of it. Sleep paralysis is a known thing. There are explanations for it. Your brain wakes up before your body does. Hallucinations happen. Fear fills in the gaps. We nodded, listened, maybe felt a little uneasy, but it didn't feel like a big deal. It was just one of those weird human experiences. About halfway through the trip, things changed. We were all sleeping in tents outside. It was cold, quiet, and the kind of night where every sound carries. In the middle of the night, we were jolted awake by him, not by yelling, exactly, but by these terrified shivers and gasps, the kind of sound that immediately tells you something is wrong. He was sitting upright in his sleeping bag, frozen, staring at one side of the tent, just staring through the mesh netting into the darkness beyond. His eyes were wide, unfocused, locked on something none of us could see. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't responding at first. We shook him, calling his name, trying to snap him out of it. Eventually, he came around enough to react. He said he felt like he was awake but trapped, like sleep paralysis again. We gathered around him, prayed with him, tried to calm him down. But then he started complaining about his back. At first, he said it felt itchy. Then he said it felt like scratching. Then it started to hurt. He kept flinching and wincing, saying ouch under his breath, then louder. He turned and got angry at the kid sitting next to him, accusing him of scratching his back on purpose. The kid swore he wasn't touching him, and we could see that he wasn't. There was space between them, no hands moving, nothing that explained it. The mood shifted fast. What had felt like a strange but manageable episode suddenly felt wrong. We kept praying, voices overlapping, trying to keep things grounded. Eventually the guy calmed down, but not in a relieved way. More like confusion replaced the fear. He looked around at us like he didn't fully understand what had just happened. When the prayer ended, he looked genuinely shaken. We asked him what was wrong, thinking maybe he was embarrassed or still scared. He opened his mouth to answer, and that's when everyone went quiet. He tried to say the word God. He couldn't. It wasn't that he didn't want to. You could see him trying. His mouth opened, his face strained. He stuttered, stuck on the first sound, like something was physically blocking him from finishing the word. The harder he tried, the more panicked he became. His face drained of color, and his eyes filled with real terror, not confusion, not embarrassment, pure fear. Eventually, he stopped trying and just shook his head. No one knew what to say after that. The rest of the night was tense and quiet. People stayed awake longer than usual. No one joked. No one really talked. Whatever sense of safety or normalcy we'd had was gone. The darkness outside the tents felt closer after that, like it was pressing in rather than just existing around us. The next morning in daylight, he explained it to us. He said that in that moment, for some reason he couldn't understand. His body wouldn't let him say the word God. Not that he forgot it. Not that he didn't believe. Just that when he tried to say it, something stopped him. He said it felt like hitting a wall inside himself, like his mouth and throat just refused to cooperate. That explanation didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. The mood for the rest of the trip was off. People were quieter, more guarded. Even normal activities felt strained, like everyone was trying to act normal without really feeling it. We were still praying, still doing what the retreat was meant for, but there was an undercurrent of unease that never really lifted. Nothing else happened like that for the remainder of the trip. No more episodes, no more shivering wake-ups, no more accusations of scratching or pain. But the memory of that night followed us all the way home. The strangest part came later. Apparently, at some point after the trip, his sleep paralysis just stopped. No gradual decrease, no treatment, no lifestyle change that anyone knew of. It just stopped one day and never came back. The thing that had haunted him for years, that he'd talked about so casually before the trip, just vanished. He never had another episode. That should have been comforting. Instead, it somehow made the whole thing feel more unsettling. I still don't know what to think about it. I'm not someone who jumps straight to supernatural explanations. But I also can't fully dismiss what we saw and heard that night. The fear was real. The pain he felt seemed real. The struggle to say that word was real. And it all happened in a place that already felt vast and isolating, under a sky that made you feel small in a way that's hard to describe. Maybe it was sleep paralysis mixed with stress and suggestion. Maybe it was something psychological that resolved itself. Maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that it changed the tone of that trip completely, and it's one of those moments that still comes back to me at night sometimes. Not in the form of a clear image, but as a feeling. That heavy, quiet dread. The sense that sometimes things happen that don't fit neatly into explanations, and all you can do is sit with the discomfort of not knowing. And the fact that it stopped afterward, like a switch flipped, is the part that still doesn't sit right with me. I was about 8 years old when this happened, and even now, decades later, it still feels strange to put into words. It's not something I've ever talked about openly. For most of my life, it lived in that quiet, sealed-off place in my head where uncomfortable memories go, the kind you don't revisit unless something forces you to. I didn't have a name for what it was back then. I just knew that it made me feel wrong, confused, and older than I was supposed to be. At that age, my world was small. Neighborhoods felt like entire universes. The people who lived a few houses down might as well have been extended family, even if you barely knew them. Adults were assumed to be in charge. Older kids were assumed to know what they were doing. There was a kind of unspoken trust that came with proximity and familiarity. If someone lived near you, they were safe by default. That's just how a kid's brain works. The neighbor in question was about 13. To me, that felt ancient. 13-year-olds might as well have been adults as far as I was concerned. He was taller, louder, more confident, already stepping into that phase where kids start acting like they know things they don't actually understand yet. I looked up to him in that casual, unquestioning way younger kids often do. If he told me to do something, I didn't automatically think to question it. One day, he told me to hang out in his bedroom closet. It wasn't framed as anything dangerous or weird. He didn't threaten me or scare me into it. He just told me to get inside the closet, stay quiet, and watch through the slatted shutters. I don't remember exactly how he explained it or what justification he gave. I just remember agreeing, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how not to. At 8 years old, you don't have the language or confidence to say, "This doesn't feel right." I remember the closet clearly. It was cramped and smelled like clothes and dust. The shutters let in strips of light, just enough to see what was happening in the room without being fully visible. I remember sitting there, knees pulled up, heart beating fast, not fully understanding why I was there or what was about to happen. Then another neighbor came over. A girl, maybe 14. Again, at that age, 14 felt impossibly grown up. She was someone I'd seen around, someone who lived nearby, someone who was part of the same environment that had always felt safe. What happened next is not something I'm going to describe in detail, because the details aren't the point. The point is that I witnessed something I should never have seen. Something sexual, violent in its own way, messy and deeply confusing. I didn't understand what was happening in the way an adult would, but I understood enough to know that it wasn't meant for me, that I wasn't supposed to be there, and that whatever this was, it had crossed a line I didn't even know existed yet. I remember feeling frozen, not screaming, not crying, just stuck. My body didn't know how to react. My brain tried to process what my eyes were seeing and failed. I felt embarrassment, fear, disgust, and curiosity, all tangled together in a way that made my stomach hurt. I didn't know where to look. I didn't know what to think. I just knew I wanted it to stop, and I wanted to leave, but I didn't feel like I could move. That moment ended eventually. I don't remember how. I don't remember leaving the closet or what was said afterward. I don't remember anyone asking me if I was okay or acknowledging that I'd been there at all. It was like the entire thing existed in a bubble that popped and disappeared, leaving me alone with the aftermath. And that aftermath followed me. At 8 years old, I didn't have the ability to understand what I'd experienced, let alone explain it to anyone. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell another adult. I didn't even tell my friends. Part of me felt like I had done something wrong, just by being there, like I would get in trouble if I spoke about it. That sense of misplaced guilt is something a lot of people carry when they're exposed to things too early. You assume responsibility for something that was never your responsibility to begin with. Life went on because that's what it does. Kids go to school, they play, they grow up, and sometimes they carry things with them without realizing how much weight they're holding. Within a year or two, the neighbor's family fell apart. His parents divorced and he moved out of the neighborhood. At the time, I didn't connect it to what I'd seen. I just knew he was gone. The house felt different after that, quieter, emptier, the kind of place you pass by and don't think about too much. Later, when I was a teenager, I mowed his mom's lawn for some extra money. By then, I was older, bigger, trying to make sense of adolescence like everyone else. I'd see her come outside sometimes, talk to me politely, thank me for the work, and there was this strange, disconnected thought in my head that I didn't fully understand at the time. Something inappropriate, something uncomfortable, something that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Looking back now, I recognize that thought for what it was. Not desire, not attraction, but confusion. Boundaries blurred too early. A child's understanding of intimacy warped before it had time to develop naturally. When you're exposed to adult or near-adult sexual situations too young, your brain doesn't just forget it. It stores it in a way that can resurface later in distorted forms. That's one of the quiet truths about experiences like this. They don't always announce themselves as trauma right away. They don't always explode into obvious symptoms. Sometimes they just sit there, subtly shaping how you think about bodies, sex, power, and consent without you realizing it. For a long time, I didn't label myself as scarred. That felt dramatic. Other people had it worse, right? No one physically hurt me, no one threatened me. No one told me I would be punished if I spoke. And yet, something was taken from me in that moment. Something intangible, but real. Innocence isn't just a poetic idea. It's a developmental stage. It's the ability to move through the world without carrying knowledge you're not equipped to handle. And once it's gone, you don't get it back. As I grew older, certain things would trigger that memory unexpectedly. Scenes in movies, conversations among friends, jokes that leaned too far into sexual territory. I'd feel uncomfortable without knowing why. I'd feel detached or overly aware or suddenly younger than I was again. It took years before I even connected those reactions to that day in the closet. I didn't tell anyone for a very long time. The first person I ever told was my wife. Saying it out loud felt surreal, like I was describing something that happened to someone else. I remember watching her face as she listened, seeing the concern, the anger, the sadness on my behalf. That reaction alone made something inside me shift. It was the first time someone had validated that what happened to me was not okay, even if it didn't fit the dramatic narratives people usually associate with trauma. And now here I am, telling it to strangers on the internet. That in itself feels strange. But there's something about anonymity that makes honesty easier. There's no fear of awkward silence, no concern about how people will look at you afterward. Just words sent out into the void. I don't know exactly how to categorize this experience. I don't know if it fits neatly into any clinical box. I just know that it mattered. It shaped me in small but lasting ways. It introduced me to things I wasn't ready to understand and left me to figure out the meaning on my own. What stays with me most is not the act itself, but the feeling of being placed somewhere I didn't belong and told to stay quiet. That feeling of powerlessness, of being a witness without consent, of having my role decided for me without my understanding or agreement. That's the part that scars. Not all wounds are obvious. Some don't bleed. Some don't leave marks you can point to. Some just quietly alter the way you see the world. I don't think about this every day. It doesn't dominate my life. But it's there, tucked into the background of who I am, a reminder of how fragile childhood really is and how easily it can be disrupted by the choices of others. I've learned, over time, to be gentler with myself about it, to recognize that 8-year-old me did nothing wrong, that agreeing to something I didn't understand wasn't consent, that confusion doesn't equal complicity. If there's anything I take from this now, it's awareness. Awareness of how important it is to protect kids from exposure they're not ready for. Awareness of how easily trust can be misused. Awareness that sometimes the most damaging experiences are the ones that don't come with obvious labels. I don't know if this story is scary enough by anyone else's standards. It's not dramatic in the way some stories are. There's no chase, no weapon, no supernatural twist. But for me, it was one of those moments where something fundamental shifted, quietly and permanently. And yeah, I reckon that kind of thing stays with you for life. I was about 10 or 11 years old when this happened, old enough to remember it clearly, but still young enough that fear hit differently. At that age, adults are supposed to be in control. Even the ones you don't like are still part of the structure that makes the world feel stable. When one of them breaks that structure, it leaves a crack that doesn't really close again. My uncle, who I now call my drunkle, was married into the family at the time. Back then, I didn't have the language to describe him properly. I just knew he drank a lot, and when he drank, everything around him felt tense. His voice would get louder, his moods would flip without warning, and you never knew what version of him you were going to get. As a kid, that kind of unpredictability is terrifying, even if no one ever explains why. One night, he was drunk enough that he stumbled into my room. I was asleep when it happened. The sound is what woke me up first. A loud crash, plastic scraping against the floor. My bedside table wasn't even a real table, just a plastic crate I used to keep random things on. He toppled into it, knocking it completely over. I remember sitting up in bed, heart pounding, confused and disoriented, trying to understand what I was seeing. He was loud, slurring, angry, not making much sense. Before I could fully process it, my older cousin stepped in. She managed to get him out of the room and locked him out. I remember watching from my bed as she closed the door, my hands gripping the blanket so hard my fingers hurt. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. He started banging on the door, not just knocking but pounding over and over, hard enough that the door shook. He screamed, he cursed, he threatened, he yelled that he was going to call the cops. He yelled that he was being locked out of his own house. His voice filled the hallway and leaked into every room. There was no way to escape the sound of it. It went on for hours. Time moves differently when you're scared like that. Minutes stretch out. Every bang feels like it might be the one that breaks the door open. Every shout feels like it's aimed directly at you, even if it isn't. I remember sitting there, frozen, listening to him rage, not knowing what he might do next. I was so scared that I got out of bed and grabbed a knife. I didn't grab it because I planned to hurt anyone. I grabbed it because I didn't know what else to do. I was a kid, and in my head, that knife was the only thing standing between me and something terrible. I held it tightly, sitting on my bed, waiting. My hands were shaking. I remember feeling ashamed even then, like I was doing something wrong. But fear doesn't care about logic. Eventually, my cousin came into my room. She saw me holding the knife and immediately came over, took it gently from my hands, and hugged me. She told me I was okay. She told me he couldn't get in. She stayed with me until I calmed down enough to lie back down. Even with her there, I didn't really sleep. I just drifted in and out, listening for footsteps, for banging, for his voice. That night never really left me. Even now, loud banging or yelling outside a door makes my chest tighten. My body remembers before my brain does. That wasn't the only time he scared us. Another incident happened on my parents' anniversary. They went out to lunch, just the two of them, which wasn't something they did often. I stayed home with another cousin, who was about 18 at the time. She was old enough to babysit, old enough to take care of us, and honestly one of the safest people we could have been left with. My drunkle was drunk again. This time, instead of stumbling around, he turned his anger on her. He yelled at her, insulted her, mentally and emotionally abused her in a way that made the air in the house feel thick and heavy. I remember sitting there, feeling small, watching an adult be attacked by another adult and realizing that age didn't always protect you. Then he threatened to call Child Protective Services. He said my parents had abandoned us. He said they left us illegally. He said he would report it. At that age, I didn't fully understand what CPS was, but I knew it was bad. I knew it meant trouble. I knew it meant being taken away. His words landed like weapons, even if he didn't fully understand the weight of them himself. My cousin didn't panic. She thought fast. She told us all to go outside. She said they couldn't accuse anyone of abandoning children if there were no children in the house. It made sense in the moment, even though it was a desperate solution. So we went outside. It was winter in Colorado. I was wearing shorts. My sister was wearing a dress. None of us had coats or proper shoes because we hadn't expected to leave the house. The cold hit us instantly, sharp and biting. The air burned our skin. I remember my legs going numb, my teeth chattering uncontrollably, my breath turning white in front of my face. We stood there, freezing, scared, and confused. At some point, I realized we couldn't stay there. The cold was too much. I told my siblings to go to the neighbor's house. I don't even remember how I found the courage to say it. I just knew that standing there wasn't safe anymore. I stayed behind, standing in the doorway. I didn't want to leave the house completely. I wanted to be close enough that my parents could find me when they came back. I remember standing there, 1 foot inside, 1 foot out, watching the driveway, waiting for their car like it was the only thing keeping me upright. When my parents finally came back, everything spilled out. At first, they were mad. Mad that we were outside. Mad that we'd gone to the neighbors. Mad because they didn't understand what had happened yet. But once we explained, once they heard about the yelling, the threats, the fear, their anger shifted. They were furious at my drunkle. Things moved quickly after that. We packed bags. We left the house. We stayed at my grandparents' place for a while. The house that was supposed to be safe didn't feel safe anymore, and everyone knew it. Looking back now, what sticks with me isn't just the fear of those moments, but how alone I felt inside them. I was surrounded by family, but the responsibility to stay safe felt like it had fallen on me too early. Holding a knife at 10 years old, standing in the cold in summer clothes, watching adults lose control and realizing that no one was magically in charge. Those experiences change how you see the world. They teach you that danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from people who are supposed to be part of your life. They teach you that safety is fragile and that adults don't always protect you the way you expect them to. They also teach you how strong you can be when you don't feel strong at all. I don't hate him now. I don't even think about him often. But I carry the memory of that fear, and it shaped me. It made me more aware, more cautious, more protective of the people I care about. It also made me deeply grateful for the people who did step up. My cousin who locked the door, the cousin who got us outside, my parents who believed us and acted. Those moments mattered just as much as the scary ones. It wasn't a horror movie. There was no monster in the dark, just a drunk, unstable adult and a kid who learned too early that sometimes you have to protect yourself, even when you don't know how. And that lesson, for better or worse, never really goes away. This is not my story directly. It belongs to a woman who was a friend of my grandmother's, but it still feels close to me because I grew up around the aftermath of it. I don't remember her the way she was before. I only remember the quiet version of her, the careful version, the woman who carried something heavy inside her that never really went away. Some of the art she made later in her life ended up with my family, and that's how I came to know pieces of what she went through. She worked at a small bank in a very small town, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where nothing much happens, and where a bank robbery or violent crime is something people talk about for decades because it's so rare. The bank itself was small too. I've been told there were only about 7 employees total. It wasn't a big, busy branch. It was the kind of place where customers were greeted by name, where the same faces came in every week, and where the employees felt more like a small family than co-workers. It was a normal workday when it happened. Nothing unusual about the morning, no warnings, no signs that the day would end the way it did. The employees were doing their usual tasks, handling deposits, chatting quietly, waiting for lunchtime. Then a man walked in. From the moment he entered, something was off. People noticed it right away. He wasn't calm. He wasn't focused. He didn't behave like someone who had a clear plan or purpose. He was talking to himself out loud, not quietly, not under his breath, but openly. His words didn't always make sense. Sometimes he sounded confused, like he didn't understand where he was or what was happening. Other times he sounded terrified, like he was reacting to something no one else could see. and then, without warning, his demeanor would flip. In an instant, he would become aggressive, hostile. His voice would change. His posture would change. It was like watching two different people occupying the same body, switching back and forth without any control. One moment he seemed scared and lost. The next, he was angry and threatening. The employees didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to talk to him because they didn't know which version of him they were dealing with at any given second. At some point, he pulled out a gun. Everything changed immediately. The moment a gun appears, time behaves differently. Seconds stretch. Sounds become sharper. Every movement feels dangerous. He took control of the room and made it clear that no one was allowed to leave. The employees were forced together, terrified, trying not to make eye contact, trying not to do anything that might trigger another violent shift in his behavior. He kept talking to himself. Sometimes he argued with himself. Sometimes he seemed to respond to voices that weren't there. His mood continued to swing between panic and rage. The people in the room didn't know whether he was going to shoot them right then or whether he might calm down. That uncertainty was its own kind of torture. They were held there for some time, though no one seems to know exactly how long. Trauma distorts memory, and in situations like that, minutes can feel like hours, and hours can feel like minutes. All anyone knew was that they were trapped, completely at his mercy, with no way to escape and no way to predict what would happen next. At some point, the man had one of his clearer moments. No one knows what caused it. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe a moment of lucidity breaking through whatever was happening in his mind. In that moment, he looked at my grandmother's friend and told her to leave. Just her. He didn't explain why. He didn't say she was chosen for any reason. He didn't ask her to do anything for him. He just told her to go. Imagine being in that position. You're standing in a room with people you work with every day, people you know, people you've joked with, shared lunches with, maybe even celebrated holidays with, and suddenly the man holding a gun tells you that you can leave, but everyone else has to stay. She hesitated. Of course she did. She didn't know if it was a trick. She didn't know if he would shoot her as soon as she turned her back. She didn't know if leaving would make things worse for the others. She didn't know if refusing would get her killed. There was no right choice. There was no safe choice. Every possible action felt wrong, but he repeated it. He told her again to leave. Eventually, shaking, terrified, she did what he said. She walked out of the bank. Every step felt unreal, like she was moving through a dream. She expected to hear a gunshot behind her at any second. She expected to be called back. She expected something terrible to happen before she made it out the door. She made it outside. She didn't get far. Moments after she left, the man shot everyone else inside the bank. He killed all of her co-workers. Then he turned the gun on himself and ended his own life. By the time authorities arrived, it was over. Everyone inside was dead, except her. She survived, but survival came with a price that would follow her for the rest of her life. No one ever understood why she was chosen. There was no pattern, no personal connection, no explanation in his background or behavior that pointed to her specifically. It could have been any of them. The randomness of it made it even harder to process. She wasn't spared because she did something right. She wasn't spared because she was special. She was spared because of a moment of chaos and an unpredictable decision made by someone who was deeply unwell. That knowledge haunted her. She carried guilt that didn't belong to her. Survivor's guilt is cruel like that. It convinces you that you owe something to the people who didn't make it, even when you had no control over what happened. She asked herself questions that had no answers. Why her? Why not someone else? Why did she walk out when the others couldn't? What if she had refused? What if she had said something different? What if she had stayed? There are no answers to those questions. What remained was trauma. After the shooting, she couldn't leave her house for months. Not because she didn't want to, but because her body wouldn't let her. The outside world felt dangerous, unpredictable, full of hidden threats. Ordinary things became terrifying. Banks, loud noises, sudden movements, men raising their voices. Even silence could trigger panic. She had severe PTSD. She had nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks that came out of nowhere. Sometimes she would relive the moment he pulled the gun. Sometimes she would relive the moment she was told to leave. Sometimes she would relive the moment she realized everyone else was dead. Trauma doesn't follow a linear narrative. It jumps around, grabbing whatever memory hurts the most in that moment. She struggled with the idea that life had continued without her co-workers, that the town slowly returned to normal, that the bank reopened, that people moved on. Meanwhile, she was stuck in that room, stuck in that day, unable to escape it, even though she had physically survived. Art became one of the few ways she could cope. She started drawing and painting, not because she wanted to create something beautiful, but because she needed somewhere to put what was inside her. Her art wasn't pretty in a traditional sense. It was raw, emotional, sometimes abstract, sometimes dark. Sometimes full of fragmented figures and empty spaces. It was clear that she was trying to express things that words couldn't reach. Some of those pieces ended up with my family. I remember seeing them as a child and feeling uneasy without fully understanding why. Even without knowing the full story, you could feel the weight behind them. They weren't decorations. They were evidence. Proof that something terrible had happened to someone who never truly recovered. As I got older and learned the story, those pieces took on a different meaning. They weren't just art, they were survival tools. They were her way of staying alive in a world that had proven itself capable of unimaginable violence without warning. She never fully returned to the person she was before. How could she? Before that day, her job was just a job. A bank was just a building. Co-workers were just people you worked with. After that day, every enclosed space carried the possibility of being trapped again. Every stranger carried the possibility of unpredictability. Safety was no longer assumed. It had to be constantly evaluated, constantly questioned. What makes this story especially haunting is how ordinary it began. This wasn't a high-security building. It wasn't a place people associated with danger. It wasn't in a big city known for violent crime. It was a small-town bank on a normal day, the kind of place where people felt safe enough to let their guard down. And then, in a matter of moments, it became a crime scene, a mass killing, a place forever marked by what happened there. The randomness of it is what sticks with me. The idea that survival came down to a decision made in a moment of mental instability, that one person lived and everyone else died, not because of logic or fairness, but because of chaos. That someone can walk into a place full of people and end multiple lives before anyone has time to stop it. It also changed how I think about trauma. From the outside, people might say she was lucky. She survived. She got out. She wasn't physically injured. But that kind of thinking ignores what survival actually costs in situations like that. Living through something like that isn't a clean escape. It leaves scars that don't show up on the body but shape everything else. She carried the memory of her co-workers' final moments. She carried the sound of the gunshots she didn't hear, but knew happened. She carried the knowledge that her life continued while theirs ended. Those things don't fade easily, if they fade at all. Even years later, even after therapy, even after time passed, certain things could still send her spiraling. A bank lobby, the sound of a door slamming, someone talking to themselves in public. Anything that resembled that day in even the smallest way. She lived with it quietly. She didn't talk about it often. She didn't seek attention or sympathy. She just did her best to survive the aftermath, one day at a time, using whatever tools she had. That's why her art matters so much to me. It's a reminder that trauma doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a quiet woman who doesn't leave her house for months. Sometimes it looks like paintings that sit in a corner, heavy with meaning. Sometimes it looks like a life that continues, but never quite the same way again. This story has stayed with me because it shows how fragile normal life really is, how quickly everything can change, how survival doesn't always feel like a victory, and how sometimes the people who live carry wounds that are just as deep as those who didn't. She lived, but part of her stayed in that bank forever. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. June 30th, 2017 is a date my cousin will never escape. It sits in her memory like a wound that never closes, no matter how much time passes. That day did not start as something tragic. It began like an ordinary, busy day in a working family's life. The kind of day no one thinks twice about because it feels so normal. My cousin had to work late that evening. It wasn't unusual. Bills had to be paid, responsibilities handled. Life kept moving forward. Her fiancé offered to pick up their 8-month-old daughter from the babysitter so she wouldn't have to rush. Their baby was still so small, barely beginning to understand the world around her. She was at that age where everything was new, where smiles came easily, where trust was absolute. She depended entirely on the adults around her to keep her safe. Her fiancé picked the baby up as planned. Instead of taking her straight home, he decided to stop at a work barbecue his boss was hosting. It was supposed to be casual, just co-workers getting together. Food on the grill, people laughing and talking after a long day. He brought the baby with him. People saw her there. She was alive, breathing, being passed around, cooed at, admired the way babies always are. No one stopped him. No one questioned whether alcohol was being served or whether it was a good idea for him to be there with an infant. It was one of those situations where responsibility dissolved into the background because nothing bad had happened yet. Hours passed. The sun went down. People drank. Somewhere during that time, he drank too much. Not just a little, not enough to feel tipsy and stop, but enough to cross a line that should never be crossed, especially with a baby in the back seat. Eventually, he decided it was time to go home. He put the baby in the car and got behind the wheel himself. He was drunk. He was responsible for an 8-month-old child. Those two facts should never exist together, yet that night, they did. No one knows exactly how far the barbecue was from their house. That detail almost doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that he never made it home. As he was turning off the highway onto their street, something went terribly wrong. He collided head-on with a boom truck. The impact was violent, sudden, unforgiving. There was no time to react, no second chance to undo the decision that led to that moment. While this was happening, my cousin was finishing her shift at work, completely unaware that her life was about to be torn apart. She drove home on roads she had driven countless times before. As she got closer, she saw flashing lights in the distance, police cars, an ambulance. At first, she didn't think much of it. Accidents happen. You slow down, you drive past, you go on with your night. Then she saw something that made her stomach drop. One of her purses was lying on the highway. The baby bag was there too, its contents scattered across the road. These were items she recognized instantly, items that belonged to her life, to her child. In that moment, before anyone spoke a word to her, she already knew something was terribly wrong. The police and emergency responders had been trying to contact her, but they hadn't been able to reach her. That is how she found out. Not through a phone call, not through someone gently preparing her, but by physically arriving at the scene of the worst moment of her life. She stepped into chaos, sirens, flashing lights, strangers moving quickly, and the pieces of her family scattered across asphalt. At the site, they told her the words no parent should ever hear. They told her her daughter had died. They told her the driver was alive and had been taken to the hospital. There was no soft way to say it. There was no sentence that could make it less devastating. Her baby, her 8-month-old daughter, was gone. An officer drove her to the hospital because she was in no condition to drive herself. The shock alone would have made it impossible. At the hospital, she found her fiancé in the ICU. He was injured, but alive. Machines beeped around him. Doctors and nurses moved calmly, professionally. He was breathing. He would survive. Her daughter would not. Later, the details came out, each one worse than the last. His blood alcohol level was 3 times over the legal limit, not slightly over, not a borderline case, but far beyond what is considered safe or legal. He had some minor cuts and bruises on the right side of his arm and face, injuries that would heal. He would walk again, talk again, live again. Their daughter had not even been fastened into her car seat. She died instantly. There was no suffering, no prolonged pain, but that fact offers little comfort. An 8-month-old baby trusted the adults around her completely. She relied on them to buckle her in, to make the right choices, to protect her from danger she couldn't understand. That trust was broken in the worst possible way. The aftermath stretched on long after the sirens stopped and the wreckage was cleared. Grief does not end with a funeral. It seeps into every part of life. My cousin had to wake up every morning knowing her child was gone. She had to walk into a silent house where toys would never be used again. She had to pack away clothes her daughter had outgrown or would never grow into. She had to explain the unexplainable to herself again and again. What made it even harder was what happened to him. He went to jail for a single day. One day, his parents bailed him out almost immediately. He returned to his life while my cousin's life had stopped completely. 2 years passed and he still had not been sentenced. Legal issues came up regarding how the police took his blood sample. He had been unconscious and no one had given permission. Because of that technical issue, everything stalled. Because of paperwork, procedures, and legal arguments, a man who killed his own child through reckless behavior remained free. 2 years later, he was still walking around without punishment by law. 2 years later, my cousin was still living with the consequences of his actions every single day. That is the part that scares me the most. Not just this one story, but what it represents. The idea that someone can behave so recklessly, so irresponsibly, and cause the death of an innocent child, and yet face so little immediate accountability. It shows how fragile justice can be, how slow it can move, how easily it can get tangled in technicalities while real people suffer. Drunk driving is not an accident, it is a choice. Putting a baby in a car without fastening them in properly is not a mistake. It is a failure of responsibility. Every step that led to that crash was avoidable. Every decision could have been different. That is what makes it so painful. This was not fate. It was not bad luck. It was preventable. My cousin did nothing wrong, yet she carries the heaviest burden. She carries grief, anger, confusion, and a sense of injustice that never fully goes away. She has to live in a world where her child is missing from every future milestone. No first steps, no first words remembered, no birthdays, no school days. no adulthood. All of it was taken away in one moment. Meanwhile, the person responsible survived. He breathes, he eats, he sleeps, he goes about his days. The imbalance of that reality is hard to accept. It feels wrong on a deep, human level. It leaves you questioning how often this happens, how many times reckless behavior ends in tragedy, while the system struggles to respond in a way that feels fair. I know, logically, that the law moves slowly. I know cases can take years. I know technicalities exist to protect rights, even when those rights belong to someone who has done something unforgivable. But emotionally, it is hard to reconcile. It feels like justice delayed is justice denied, especially when the cost was a child's life. I believe his day will come. I believe accountability cannot be avoided forever. But even if it does come, it will always be too late. Nothing can undo what happened on that road. Nothing can bring back an 8-month-old baby who should be alive today, growing, laughing, learning the world. This story is a reminder of how quickly everything can be destroyed by one bad decision. It is a warning about drunk driving, about complacency, about assuming nothing will go wrong. It shows how vulnerable the most innocent among us are, and how much they depend on adults to protect them. Most of all, it shows how terrifying it is that sometimes the consequences do not match the harm done. That is what stays with me. That is what keeps this story alive in my mind. Because if it can happen to them, it can happen to anyone, and that is a truth that should never be ignored. There are certain things you see once that never really leave you. For me, it's serious car accidents. Not the fender benders or the ones where everyone walks away shaken but alive. I mean the ones where you don't need an official report to know how it ended, where the vehicles are so destroyed that the outcome feels obvious and final, even before you hear anything else. I've seen the aftermath of a few accidents like that, and each one leaves a mark. You drive past slowly, almost against your will, and your brain fills in the blanks you wish it wouldn't. Twisted metal, shattered glass, emergency lights reflecting off the road. That heavy, quiet feeling that settles in your chest when you know someone's life just ended a few minutes ago, maybe seconds ago, right there where you're driving. But there was one accident in particular that completely shook me. It happened a couple of years ago on the interstate. I remember exactly where I was and how my stomach dropped the moment I saw it. A truck had crashed directly into a concrete support wall for a bridge. Not a guardrail, not another car. A solid, immovable wall. The front of the truck was completely crushed, folded in on itself in a way that didn't look survivable. It didn't look like an accident where someone might be trapped and rescued. It looked final. This was about a week before Christmas. That detail alone made it worse. Everything around that time of year is supposed to be about family, warmth, togetherness, and there it was. This scene of absolute destruction in the middle of all that. I remember driving past and feeling numb, then sick, then angry at myself for even looking. Over the next few days, more details came out in the news. At first, they said it was a father and his 2 very young children. The father and one of the children had died instantly at the scene. The other child had been rushed to the hospital in critical condition. I remember holding on to a tiny shred of hope for that child, even though I didn't know them, even though the accident looked as bad as it did. You always hope that somehow someone makes it. Later, it came out that the surviving child had died at the hospital. That alone was devastating. 3 lives lost, 2 of them barely even started. I remember thinking about Christmas presents that would never be opened, beds that would stay empty, a family that would never be the same again. It was heartbreaking in a way that sat heavy in my chest for days. And then the worst part came out. A day or two later, the news reported that this wasn't an accident in the way everyone had assumed. Investigators believed the father had intentionally crashed the truck. He and his wife were in the middle of a divorce, and he was not in a good mental state. In his despair, he had chosen to end his own life and take his children with him. That revelation changed everything. What had already been a tragedy became something even darker. It wasn't just a loss. It was a deliberate act, driven by pain and instability, that took innocent lives along with it. Knowing that those children didn't just die in an accident, but were brought into it by someone they trusted completely, is something that still makes my stomach turn. I think about it more often than I want to. I think about how fast a moment like that happens. One decision, one turn of the wheel, and entire lives are erased. I think about the mother who not only lost her children but had to live with the knowledge of how and why it happened. I think about the kids who had no choice, no understanding of what was happening, no chance to escape. Every time I drive past that stretch of road, I remember it. It's not just the image of the crushed truck that stays with me. It's the layers of tragedy behind it. The mental health crisis that went unseen or untreated. The breakdown of a family, the irreversible consequences of one person's decision. It horrifies me. It breaks my heart. And it's one of those stories that never really settles into the past, no matter how much time passes. It's a reminder that not all car accidents are accidents, and that sometimes the most devastating ones are driven by pain that no one else could see until it was far too late. In 2009, I came home from Job Corps for the summer. At the time, it felt like a break from a very controlled, structured environment, and I remember being relieved to be back in a place that felt familiar. My neighborhood hadn't changed much on the surface. Same streets, same parks, same quiet routines. It felt like stepping back into a paused version of my life. That summer was when I met her. She lived in the neighborhood, but I hadn't noticed her before then. She was a couple of years younger than me. Young enough that I could tell she was still figuring herself out, but old enough to carry herself like someone who had already seen more than she should have. I kept seeing her at the park. At first, it was just passing glances, the kind you don't think much about. Then one day we started talking, and something about it felt easy right away. We hit it off quickly, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that felt intense or romantic, but in a way that felt natural. We talked about small things at first, where we went to school, what we did during the day, the kind of conversations you have when you're just getting to know someone and you're feeling out the edges of who they are. She told me she had just moved into the neighborhood with her dad. That explained why I hadn't seen her around before. There was something sad about her, though. Not obvious, not exaggerated, just a quiet heaviness that sat under everything she said. It came out more clearly when I told her I was only home for the summer. I explained that I'd be heading back up to Reno in a couple of weeks to continue Job Corps. When I said it, her expression changed. She didn't try to hide it. She just looked disappointed, like she'd already gotten used to the idea of me being around. That stuck with me. She told me she didn't really know anyone yet, that moving had been hard, that she spent a lot of time by herself. Looking back, it felt like she really needed a friend, someone consistent, someone who would listen without asking too many questions. At the time, I didn't think much beyond that. I just knew I enjoyed talking to her, and she seemed to enjoy having someone to talk to as well. We spent more time together at the park over the next couple of weeks. Nothing unusual, just talking, sitting on benches, watching kids play, complaining about the heat. Vegas summers are brutal, the kind of heat that drains you without you realizing it. Still, we stayed out there because it gave us somewhere to be that wasn't home. She talked about her dad sometimes, but not in detail. Just small mentions. He worked odd hours. He was tired a lot. They had moved around before. I didn't push for more. I didn't feel like it was my place, and she didn't seem eager to say more anyway. Some people carry their lives carefully, offering only what they're ready to share. The summer went by fast. As my last day of break got closer, I remember feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me was ready to go back and get on with my life. Another part of me felt uneasy about leaving, not because I thought anything bad would happen, but because it felt like I was stepping out of someone else's story, without knowing how it would continue. The night before I was supposed to leave is the one that never really left me. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard noise outside. Sirens, the kind that cut through sleep instantly. My bedroom window faced the empty lot next door to my house, a place that had been vacant for as long as I could remember. Overgrown bushes, broken fencing, nothing but weeds and trash most of the time. When something happened there, you noticed. I got out of bed and went to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see without being obvious. Police cars were pulled up along the street, lights flashing red and blue across the empty lot, across houses, across everything. Officers were moving around with flashlights, focused on something near the bushes at the front of the lot. At first, I couldn't tell what was going on. Then I realized someone had found a body. Even then, my brain struggled to process it. I remember thinking about how strange it was that there was no smell. It sounds like a horrible thing to notice, but it's what stood out to me. Vegas heat is unforgiving. Things don't stay hidden for long. I remember wondering how long the body had been there, how no one had noticed before. The police worked quietly but with urgency, trying to pull the body out of the bushes. It was tangled, stuck, heavier than it looked. They struggled, adjusting their grip, repositioning, trying to move it without causing more damage. The whole thing felt surreal, like watching something you weren't supposed to see. Then I saw her. She was sitting in the back of a police car. At first, I wasn't sure it was her. The light from the patrol car flickered across her face, and she looked different somehow. Still, empty. She was watching everything through the rear window, staring out at the officers as they fought to remove the body from the bushes. Her expression wasn't crying, it wasn't screaming, it wasn't panic, it was blank. That image hit me harder than anything else that night. A girl I had been talking to just hours earlier, sitting in the back of a police car, watching a dead body being pulled from the ground. There was no reaction on her face that I could read. Just quiet observation. My dad heard the commotion too and went outside to see what was going on. He actually spoke to the cops. I stayed at the window watching, feeling like I was frozen in place. When my dad came back inside later, I asked him what had happened. All he told me was that some homeless guy had froze to death. That didn't make sense, not even a little. Vegas summers don't freeze anyone. The nights can cool down, sure, but not like that. Not enough for someone to freeze to death. The explanation felt wrong, incomplete, like a placeholder for something no one wanted to say out loud. He also told me they were taking the man's daughter into protective custody. That's when everything shifted. The body in the bushes wasn't just a stranger. It wasn't some random homeless man who had wandered into the lot. It was her father. Suddenly, the sadness I had noticed in her made more sense. The way she seemed isolated. The way she carried herself like someone who had learned not to expect stability. The way she reacted when I told her I was leaving. It all clicked into place in the worst way possible. I never saw her again. Not the next day. Not after I came back to visit. Not ever. She disappeared completely. No sign of her at the park. No sign of anyone living in that house again. It was like she and her father had never existed, like the neighborhood had swallowed them whole and moved on. I don't even think the death was reported on, at least not in any way that reached me. No big news story, no warning headlines, no follow-up that explained what really happened. Just whispers, assumptions, and a vague explanation that didn't hold up under even a moment of thought. Over time, the lot went back to being empty. The bushes stayed overgrown. Life went on. People stopped talking about it. But for me, it never really settled. I thought about her a lot after that, about what her life must have been like before they moved into the neighborhood, about what she saw that night, about how it must have felt to sit in the back of a police car, watching officers pull her father's body out of the bushes, about how quickly everything familiar was taken from her. Protective custody sounds safe when you say it out loud, but it's terrifying when you think about it from a child's perspective. Being taken away in the middle of the night, being told you can't go home, being separated from the only person you know, even if that person is gone forever, being handed over to strangers with no idea what comes next. What haunts me the most is how little closure there was. No answers, no explanation that made sense. Just a strange story about a man freezing to death in a place where freezing doesn't happen, and a girl who vanished from my life as suddenly as she had entered it. I was supposed to leave for Reno the next day. I did. Life pulled me forward whether I was ready or not. But part of me stayed behind in that moment, standing at my bedroom window, watching police lights flicker across the bushes, watching my friend stare back at the scene with empty eyes. Sometimes I wonder what happened to her, where she ended up, whether she remembers that summer the same way I do, whether she remembers me at all. I wonder if she ever got answers, or if she was left with the same unanswered questions that still linger in my mind. That experience changed the way I see things. It taught me that tragedy doesn't always come with explanations that make sense. Sometimes the official story doesn't match reality. Sometimes people disappear without leaving a trace. Sometimes the most unsettling events aren't the loud ones, but the quiet ones that slip through the cracks and never get talked about again. Even now, years later, I still think about that night, about how close it all felt, about how easily it could have been ignored if I hadn't looked out my window, about how someone can exist in your life briefly and then vanish completely, leaving behind nothing but questions and a memory that refuses to fade. It's one of those stories that doesn't have a clean ending. There's no lesson neatly wrapped up at the end, just a lingering sense of unease, and the understanding that sometimes the scariest things are the ones that are never fully explained. My buddy is not the kind of person who exaggerates or leans into spooky nonsense. He's extremely grounded, very scientific, there's a rational explanation for everything type. So when he told me this, I listened in a different way than I would if it came from someone who already believed in the paranormal. They lived in a brand new neighborhood, one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looks almost identical. Fresh construction, clean streets, no long history attached to the land as far as anyone knew. Nothing about it screamed haunted or creepy. On paper, it was just another suburban home. But from the beginning, something felt off about the basement. The basement wasn't fully finished, which is pretty common in new builds. Concrete floors, some framing, utility areas, not much else. Still, his brother always said the basement felt wrong. Not scary in a dramatic way, just uncomfortable. Like being watched, or like the space didn't want you there. The kind of feeling you try to ignore because it sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. From time to time, he said he would hear what sounded like doors closing down there. Not loud bangs, just the soft but distinct sound of a door shutting. The problem was, there weren't any doors down there that could have made that noise. No reason for it. No airflow explanation that made sense. Another time, he swore he heard whispering, not clear words, just low, quiet voices like someone talking just out of earshot. Again, he brushed it off at first. Houses make noise. New houses especially settle and shift. You tell yourself that and move on. Eventually, though, curiosity got the better of him. One day he decided to actually check it out. Nothing dramatic, no fear-fueled panic, just a calm walk downstairs. He flicked on lights, walked around, checked corners, looked behind things. He found nothing, no people, no animals, no signs of anyone being there. Satisfied, or at least reassured, he started walking back up the stairs. That's when everything changed. About halfway up, something grabbed his ankle, not brushed it, not bumped into him, grabbed him. Whatever it was, yanked him backward with enough force that he lost his balance. He started screaming as he was dragged down the stairs, hitting step after step, his body slamming hard against them. My friend, who was upstairs, heard the screaming and the unmistakable sound of someone being pulled down the staircase, thud after thud after thud. He didn't think. He just ran. He bolted downstairs, adrenaline fully kicking in, expecting to see some kind of intruder or animal. Instead, he found his brother at the bottom of the stairs, completely hysterical, crying uncontrollably, shaking, barely able to speak. When he finally managed to talk, he said something had grabbed him, something that looked almost human but moved like an animal, low to the ground, crawling, wrong. He couldn't describe it clearly, only that it wasn't right and that it had strength. As they were trying to process that, they heard whispering again. This time, it wasn't vague. They heard their names, clear enough that there was no mistaking it. Then the furnace room door slammed shut on its own. That was enough. They didn't investigate further. They didn't argue. They didn't try to be brave. They got out of the basement immediately and stayed away from it. No curiosity left. Just fear. Later on, after things had calmed down a bit, they decided they needed proof. Something concrete. Something they could listen to later and say, okay, this is real, or okay, this is nothing. So they took a small cassette tape recorder, one of those old mini ones. They tied a rope to it and slid it down the stairs into the basement, letting it sit in the main room. They left it recording for about an hour. When they pulled it back up, they hesitated before listening. Eventually, they pressed play. What they heard wasn't silence. Most of the tape was filled with a low, bellowing gurgle, not mechanical, not white noise, something that sounded wet and deep and wrong. Layered over it were blood-curdling screams. Not like a person screaming in pain, but something closer to an animal mixed with a human voice. And underneath all of that, a guttural whisper. Their names. Over and over. Hearing it broke something in them. They said it felt maddening, like listening to it for too long would do permanent damage. They didn't keep the tape. They didn't analyze it. They didn't show it to anyone. They burned it. After that night, nothing else happened. At least, nothing they noticed. No more noises, no more whispers, no more doors slamming, but the feeling never fully went away. They moved later that year. My friend doesn't swear this is absolute truth. He doesn't claim to understand what happened. He doesn't even insist it was paranormal. He just tells the story exactly as it was told to him, and I believe that part, at least. I believe he believes his brother, and honestly, that's what makes it unsettling. There's no dramatic conclusion, no explanation, no proof left behind, just a story that shouldn't exist in a normal, brand new house in a quiet neighborhood. Maybe there's a rational explanation. Maybe there isn't. All I know is that when someone who never talks about stuff like this tells you a story like that, it sticks with you. Shit is whack. I grew up in the same area where this horrific event took place, and I am actually a year younger than the young woman at the center of this tragedy. When the news first broke, it didn't just ripple through our community, it shook me to my very core. In a small town, you are raised with the belief that the streets you walk and the roads you drive are extensions of your own home. You know the names of the shopkeepers, you recognize the cars in the driveways, and you never imagined that a monster could be sitting at the red light right next to you. But this story changed everything for those of us who lived there. It was a brutal wake-up call that the safety we cherished was nothing more than a fragile illusion, a thin curtain that could be shredded by the hands of a stranger in a matter of seconds. The narrative that I heard, and the one that has been whispered in hushed tones across kitchen tables for years, began at a local gas station. It was one of those typical spots where everyone stops to fill up their tank or grab a quick snack before heading home. The young woman was there with her boyfriend, enjoying a night that should have ended with a simple drive and a quiet sleep. While they were at the station, a car pulled up with a group of men who were outsiders, people no one recognized. For reasons that remained senseless, an argument broke out. Her boyfriend exchanged some ugly, heated words with these men. It was the kind of typical, prideful dispute that happens 1,000 times a day between young men, usually ending with a middle finger and a squeal of tires. The perpetrators eventually got into their car and sped away, disappearing into the dark. And for a moment, it seemed like the tension had dissipated. But the darkness that night was different. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a living, breathing thing that was waiting for a moment of vulnerability. Shortly after the argument, her boyfriend left the gas station, heading in a different direction. The young woman was left alone, eventually getting into her own car to begin the short drive back to her house. She had done absolutely nothing wrong. She hadn't been the one shouting. She hadn't been the one looking for a fight. She was simply a passenger in a moment of conflict that she likely wanted no part of. As she pulled out onto the main road, the headlights of a car appeared in her rearview mirror. At first, she probably didn't think much of it, but as the miles went by, the car behind her began to close the distance with a terrifying speed. The men from the gas station had come back. They hadn't gone home to cool off. They had circled back, looking for the man who had insulted them. When they found that he was gone and that only the girl remained, their twisted sense of vengeance shifted onto her. They began to follow her through the winding backroads that we all knew so well. The chase was relentless. Every time she tried to speed up or turn, they were right there, their high beams blinding her and filling her cabin with a cold, predatory light. The psychological horror of being hunted on roads you've driven 1,000 times is something I can barely fathom. Eventually, they decided they were done with the chase. They accelerated and rammed her car with a violent force, sending her spinning off the asphalt and into the deep, dark ditch at the side of the road. The crash itself was enough to kill most people, but for her, the impact was only the beginning of the nightmare. Trapped in her wrecked vehicle, dazed and injured, she was at the mercy of sick strangers who had no concept of mercy. What followed was an act of such depravity and violence that it defies any attempt to find a reason behind it. It wasn't just a crime of opportunity, it was a calculated act of misdirected vengeance. They took out their anger toward her boyfriend on her, using her body as a canvas for their hatred. She was raped, beaten, and left for dead in the cold, damp earth of our hometown. The men who did this weren't just criminals. They were predators who viewed a human life as something to be discarded once they were finished with their fun. When she was finally found, she was barely clinging to life. The physical toll was catastrophic, leaving her with disfiguring scars that would serve as a permanent map of the violence she had endured. But as horrific as the physical injuries were, the emotional trauma was even deeper. She had looked into the eyes of absolute evil and survived, but the girl she had been before that night was gone. She was a survivor, yes, but she was a survivor of a world that had shown its teeth in the most brutal way possible. The community rallied around her, but there was a collective sense of anger that began to simmer when the legal proceedings began. This is the part of the story that still causes a knot of fury in my stomach. She got no justice. In a system that is supposed to protect the innocent and punish the guilty, the perpetrators of this horrific crime never even faced a trial. Because of their legal status and the complexities of international law at the time, the men were simply deported. They were sent back to their home country, effectively escaping any real punishment for what they had done. They didn't spend years in a prison cell reflecting on their crimes. They were just removed from the area, free to live their lives while the victim was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered existence. There were no victim impact statements in a courtroom, no judge handing down a life sentence, and no closure for the woman who had lost everything. It is the worst way to imagine a life being forever altered at the hands of 6 strangers who have no mercy and will never face justice of any kind. It proves that fucked up things can happen to anyone, anywhere, and that the world doesn't always have a mechanism to make it right. She was an innocent bystander in a game of ego, and she paid a price that no human being should ever have to pay. Growing up a year younger than her, I watched how the town changed after that. The gas station didn't feel like a safe hangout spot anymore. The back roads felt more like traps than shortcuts. Parents held their daughters a little tighter, and the lightheartedness of our youth was replaced by a grim awareness that monsters really do exist, and sometimes the law let them walk away. I still think about the disfiguring scars she carries. They aren't just marks on her skin, they are a testimony to the failure of a system and the cruelty of men who felt entitled to destroy a life over a few ugly words at a gas station. The horror of that night is a shadow that hasn't lifted from our area, even decades later. It serves as a haunting reminder that innocence is no protection against a heart full of violence. We like to think that justice is an inevitable outcome, that the bad guys always get what's coming to them. But her story tells a different truth. It tells us that sometimes the predators win, and the victims are left to walk through the world with the memory of the darkness tucked under their skin. The fact that these men were deported instead of being held accountable is a specialized kind of injustice. It felt like the authorities were just washing their hands of the situation, choosing the easiest path rather than the right one. For her, every day is a reminder of what happened, while for them, the incident is likely just a distant memory of a night in a small town across the ocean. The imbalance of pain is staggering. I often wonder where she is now, and if she has ever found a way to feel safe again. How do you ever trust a stranger after you've been rammed off the road and violated by men who were looking for a fight that wasn't even yours? The narrative of the gas station argument is particularly chilling because of how common it is. We've all been in situations where words are exchanged, or someone is rude in a public place. You never expect that a moment of minor conflict could escalate into a life-altering tragedy. It highlights the unpredictable nature of human aggression and how quickly a situation can spiral out of control when people have no moral compass. The perpetrators didn't just want to win an argument, they wanted to destroy something, and they chose the most vulnerable person available to be the target of that destruction. As the years go by, the specific names might fade from the public memory, but the feeling of the story remains. It's a part of the local folklore now, a dark chapter that we use to warn the younger generation. We tell them to be careful where they stop, to watch who is following them, and to never engage with strangers who seem looking for trouble. It's a sad lesson to have to teach, but in a world where justice is a rare commodity, caution is the only defense we have left. The young woman's story is a permanent scar on the history of our town, a reminder that the most horrific things can happen in the most ordinary places. The physical disfigurement she suffered is a part of the horror that people often overlook. We talk about the trauma and the rape, but we forget about the daily reality of looking in the mirror and seeing the work of a monster. Those scars are a constant, unwanted conversation with the past. They are a physical manifestation of the lack of mercy she was shown that night. It's a specialized kind of cruelty to leave someone with a permanent reminder of their worst moment, knowing that you will never have to answer for it. The injustice of the deportation is like a second attack, a legal stripping of her rights as a victim and a citizen. I still find it terrifying that this could happen to anyone. You can be the most careful person in the world. You can stay out of trouble and follow all the rules, and you can still find yourself in the path of someone else's madness. She did absolutely nothing to deserve that night. She was a daughter, a friend, a young woman with a whole future ahead of her, and it was all nearly taken away because of a bruised ego at a gasoline pump. The randomness of it is what keeps me awake at night. It makes you realize that our safety is often just a matter of luck. The luck of not being at the wrong place at the wrong time. The men who did this will never know the courage it took for her to survive. They will never understand the strength required to wake up every morning and face a world that failed her. They are cowards who used their combined strength to overpower one person and then hid behind the complexities of the law to avoid their fate. They are a testament to the fact that some people are beyond redemption, fueled only by a violent, misdirected vengeance that knows no bounds. The lack of a trial means their names weren't even dragged through the dirt as they should have been. They slipped away like shadows, leaving her to deal with the light of a world that looked very different after the crash. The small town we grew up in still feels quiet, but it's a heavy quiet now. When I drive past that gas station, I don't see a place to get snacks. I see the starting point of a nightmare. When I drive those back roads, I don't see the beauty of the countryside. I see a kill zone where a young woman was hunted like an animal. The geography of our home has been permanently altered by the memory of that night. It's a haunting that doesn't need a ghost, just the weight of a story that ended without any sense of justice. I hope that by sharing this, people understand the gravity of what happened. It wasn't just a crime. It was a failure of humanity and a failure of the law. We owe it to the victims of these kinds of tragedies to keep their stories alive, to remind the world that justice isn't always served, and that the scars they carry are a responsibility for all of us. We have to be the ones who care, who ask the questions, and who demand better from the systems that are supposed to keep us safe. Because if we don't, then the predators really do get the final word. The trauma she endured is a lifelong sentence, a prison of memories that she didn't choose. While the men who attacked her are free somewhere else, she is bound to that night in the ditch. The unfairness of it is a physical weight. It proves that the world isn't always a fair place, and that the good guys don't always win. But it also proves that the human spirit is incredibly resilient. She survived something that would have broken most people. And even with the scars and the trauma, she is still here. She is a reminder of the strength that exists, even in the face of absolute darkness. I wish I could go back to the day before it happened and warn her. I wish I could tell her boyfriend to just drive away and not say a word. I wish I could change the path of that car so it never hit her. But we don't get to rewrite the past. We only get to live with the consequences of it. And for those of us who grew up in that area, the consequence is a permanent loss of innocence and a deep, lingering fear of the dark. We are the witnesses to a story that had no happy ending, only a long, difficult journey toward a healing that might never be complete. The strangers who came to our town that night left more than just a wrecked car and a broken body. They left a legacy of fear that has lasted for a generation. They showed us that the monsters aren't in books or movies. They are in cars on the highway, and they have no mercy. They showed us that vengeance can be directed at anyone, and that the law doesn't always have the power to stop it. It's a lesson that I carry with me every single day, a cold, hard truth that I learned when I was just a year younger than the girl who lived through the impossible. If you ever find yourself in a small town and you think you're safe because everyone knows your name, remember her story. Remember that the world is much larger than your neighborhood, and that not everyone who enters it has a soul. Stay vigilant, look out for your friends, and never underestimate the power of a sick stranger with a heart full of hate. Because the fucked up stuff that people talk about is real, and it's waiting just beyond the reach of the streetlights, looking for a reason to strike. The young woman who survived that night is a hero in my eyes, not because of what happened to her, but because of the fact that she is still standing. She is the living proof that evil can be faced, and that even the deepest scars can be worn with a quiet, terrible dignity. She got no justice from the world, so we have to be the ones to give her the respect and the memory she deserves. We have to be her voice in a world that tried to silence her, and we have to never, ever forget what happened in that ditch on a dark night in a town that thought it was safe. When I was about 10 years old, riding my BMX was one of the few things that made me feel completely free. I lived in a quiet neighborhood where kids still played outside, and most days after school or on weekends, I would grab my bike and meet up with a friend who lived just a few streets away. We didn't think much about danger back then. The world felt small, familiar, and mostly safe. Everyone knew everyone, or at least that's what it felt like at the time. That particular day started like any other. The sun was out, the air was warm, and my friend and I were riding our bikes close to my house, talking about random things that only kids care about. We were laughing, doing small jumps off the curb, and racing each other down the street. There was nothing unusual about the day, nothing that felt off or threatening. It was just another normal afternoon. At some point, my neighbor came over to us. He lived a few houses down and was someone I recognized, an adult I had seen around many times before. He looked a bit serious, which was unusual because most adults either ignored us or casually waved as we rode by. He told us that earlier someone had come to the front of my house asking questions about me. He said it felt strange and that the person asking didn't seem like they belonged in the neighborhood. He even said he thought they might have been planning to kidnap me. I remember how that sounded at the time. Kidnapping felt like something out of movies or scary stories adults told to make kids behave. It didn't feel real. I honestly thought my neighbor was exaggerating or trying to scare me. Maybe he was joking, or maybe he was just being overly cautious. Either way, I didn't take it seriously. I shrugged it off, laughed a little, and went right back to riding my bike. In my head, nothing like that could actually happen to me, especially not in my own neighborhood. About half an hour later, my friend and I were riding on a different road, a bit farther from my house, but still close enough to feel familiar. The street wasn't very busy, and there weren't many people around. I remember the sound of a car slowing down behind us. When I looked over, I saw a beige Land Cruiser pull up nearby. It immediately caught my attention because I didn't recognize the vehicle, and it wasn't common to see cars stopping near kids like that. There were 3 teenagers inside the car. I had never seen any of them before. They didn't look like they were from the neighborhood, and something about the way they were watching me made my stomach tighten. One of them leaned out slightly and called to me by name. Hearing my name come from a stranger's mouth was shocking. It felt wrong, like a line had been crossed. They said, "Hey you, are you Illicit Razor? Get in the car." As they said it, the passenger door opened and one of them started to get out. Everything happened very quickly, but at the same time it felt like time slowed down. My heart started pounding and a wave of fear rushed through my body. Suddenly my neighbor's warning didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt terrifyingly real. I didn't think. I didn't stop to ask questions or try to understand what was happening. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I dropped my bike right there on the road and ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back. All I could think about was getting away. My legs felt heavy, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I ran straight to my friend's house, my chest burning, my breath coming in sharp gasps. When I reached his house, I ran around the back and hid, crouching down and trying to stay out of sight. I was shaking so badly that I could barely control my breathing. My friend was just as scared as I was, his eyes wide as he tried to understand what had just happened. His dad heard the commotion and went out to the front of the house to see what was going on. From where I was hiding, I couldn't see much, but I could hear voices. His dad confronted the teenagers and asked them what they were doing. They laughed it off and said it was just a joke. They claimed they were messing around and didn't mean any harm. After that, they got back into the car and drove away. I never saw them again. Even though they said it was a joke, nothing about it felt like one. The fear didn't go away when the car left. It stayed with me, sinking deep into my chest. That day changed something inside me. The world didn't feel as safe as it had just a few hours earlier. Streets that once felt familiar now seemed full of hidden dangers. Every unfamiliar car made my heart race. Every stranger felt like a possible threat. For the next 3 years, I was scared to go outside. Riding my bike, something I had once loved, became something I avoided. I stayed closer to home, and even then, I was always on edge. I watched cars carefully, memorized faces, and constantly looked over my shoulder. My parents noticed that I had changed, that I was quieter and more anxious, but it was hard to explain the fear in a way that made sense to them. At night, I would replay the moment in my head over and over again. The sound of the car slowing down, my name being called, the door opening. I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't run. I wondered why they knew my name. I wondered if they really had been joking, or if something much worse had almost happened. As I got older, I started to understand just how close I might have come to something truly dangerous. What scared me the most wasn't just the memory of that day, but the realization of how quickly life can change. One normal afternoon, one decision to run instead of hesitate, and everything after that became different. Even now, years later, that fear hasn't completely disappeared. It shaped how I see the world and how I think about safety. It taught me that danger doesn't always announce itself clearly, and that sometimes the things adults warn you about are real, even when they sound exaggerated at first. That day stayed with me, not as a single moment, but as a long shadow that followed me through my childhood. And even though nothing else like that ever happened again, the impact of it lasted far longer than the few minutes it took for a beige Land Cruiser to pull up and drive away. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late.